Welcome to the debate. Have you ever noticed how time just completely distorts when you're under pressure?
Oh, absolutely. It's like it either stops entirely or just vanishes.
Right. Like when you're in a relaxed conversation with a friend, an hour can fly by in what feels like minutes. But imagine sitting across from an IELTS examiner in this, quiet, sterile room.
Yeah, just you, the examiner, and a ticking clock.
Exactly. They slide a small piece of paper across the desk, click a stopwatch, and tell you that you have exactly 1 minute to prepare. And that single minute just evaporates in an absolute flash.
It really does.
But then they expect you to speak continuously for 2 whole minutes based on what you just prepared. And suddenly, those 2 minutes stretch out like a terrifying eternity.
I mean, it is the ultimate psychological pressure cooker. For anyone trying to secure a band 7 or higher, this format, the dreaded cue card of speaking part 2, is easily the most unnatural part of the exam.
It really is.
Because in the real world, human conversation is a volley, right? We take turns. If I stop talking, you pick up the slack.
Exactly.
But here, you're delivering this 2-minute monologue into total, unforgiving silence.
Precisely. And that brings us to the core of our discussion today. When a candidate steps into that testing room, aiming for those top-tier marks, what should their primary focus be?
Right, that's the big question.
I take the position that IELTS Speaking Part 2 is fundamentally an exercise in structural engineering. To succeed, especially under that kind of cognitive load, you need strict organization.
Okay, but
You need strategic keyword mapping during your prep minute and mechanical expansion using targeted linking words. You literally have to build a scaffolding that guarantees you won't run out of things to say.
and I approach this from the complete opposite direction, actually. While a basic structure is helpful, achieving a band 7 or higher really relies on authentic narrative flow, emotional resonance, and natural communication.
But the structure, the exam isn't evaluating your ability to present a perfectly engineered formula. It's evaluating your ability to communicate clearly and confidently. Over-focusing on structure leads to robotic, memorized answers.
I see why you emphasize natural communication. I really do. But let me give you a different perspective on why structure simply has to come first.
Go ahead. Let's look at the actual grading criteria for fluency and coherence. To speak continuously for 2 minutes without stopping abruptly at, say, the 40-second mark, which is a massive common pitfall, you cannot just rely on good vibes.
Well, I wouldn't call it just good vibes, but I get your point.
The brain needs a disciplined method. The cue card hands you bullet points, right? Where you went, who you went with, what you did, and why it was memorable.
Right, the standard prompts.
If you use your 1-minute preparation strictly for mapping out keywords and planning linking words, you create a sort of cognitive failsafe.
A cognitive failsafe? Wait, can you break down what you mean by that exactly?
Absolutely. So under high stress, our working memory shrinks. If you don't have a blueprint, your brain literally freezes because it's trying to figure out what to say and how to say it at the exact same time.
Which is a lot to juggle, sure.
Right. By mapping out a precise structural path, you separate those two tasks. You look at your keyword blueprint for the what, which frees up your mental RAM to focus on the how, the grammar and the vocabulary.
That's a compelling argument regarding cognitive load. But have you considered what happens when a candidate focuses entirely on that blueprint?
What do you mean?
They stop communicating and start reciting. When we analyze the grading rubrics, especially for lexical resource and pronunciation, examiners are looking for a natural rhythm. They want intonation and a wide range of vocabulary.
Right, which you can plan for.
But when you prioritize a mechanical checklist of bullet points, you strip the soul out of the answer. You unlock advanced vocabulary naturally when you focus on the emotional journey of the prompt, like when the card asks you to explain how you felt.
But how does focusing on emotion practically generate better vocabulary, though? I think a lot of listeners might hear emotional journey and think, well, that sounds a bit vague for a standardized test.
It's actually deeply rooted in how our memory works. It's called associative memory networking.
Okay, explain that.
So when you vividly recall the feeling of a moment, let's say you're describing a mountain trip, and you actively remember the chill in the air and the smell of the pine trees, Your brain neurologically activates clusters of high-level adjectives.
Like what?
Words like crisp, breathtaking, or exhilarating suddenly become accessible. Rote memorization of a structural framework just cannot access those sensory vocabulary networks in the same way. The advanced vocabulary follows automatically when the memory is vivid.
Interesting. Well, let's test that theory against the very first major hurdle of the exam, which is the 1-minute preparation strategy.
Okay, let's look at it.
Examiners universally agree that the golden rule here is never to write complete sentences. You write keywords. So imagine a candidate gets a prompt about a memorable trip.
Right, a very common topic.
A perfectly engineered structural map looks like this: Murray, family, summer, hiking, photography, cool weather, delicious food, relaxing.
Okay, I see where you're going.
This precise keyword scaffolding acts like waypoints on a GPS. It breaks the intimidating 2 minutes down into digestible chunks. If I have 8 keywords and I know I just need to spend 15 seconds on each one, I've safely mathematically reached the 2-minute mark.
Wait, before we move on, let me clarify something for the listeners. When you say candidate should just write down a list of disconnected nouns and adjectives,
Yes, keywords.
I have to push back a bit. I agree completely that writing full sentences is a fatal error. You'll write maybe 2 sentences, panic, and the minute is over. But a list of disconnected nouns is essentially a grocery list.
But a grocery list is highly effective when you need to remember exactly what to buy without getting distracted.
Yes, but reading a grocery list aloud does not make for a compelling story. And this leads directly to a very specific phenomenon we see all the time in the exam room.
Which is?
Candidates look at a paper with 8 nouns on it, and they start speaking in very short, choppy sentences. They say, I went to Moree. I went with my family. It was summer. We went hiking. Boom.
Well, they're getting through the points.
Yeah, but they've burned through 4 keywords in 10 seconds. They are treating the words as items to cross off a checklist rather than experiences to share.
I see the risk there, yes.
So I argue that the 1 minute is much better spent mentally reliving the experience. You jot down a couple of key concepts, sure, but you use the remaining 40 seconds to put yourself back on that hiking trail. Establish the tone so your intonation sounds natural.
That is an interesting observation about candidates burning through their list, though I would diagnose the root cause a bit differently.
Oh, how so?
The reason they burn through those words in 10 seconds isn't because the list is flawed, it's because they haven't been trained in the mechanics of structural expansion.
Structural expansion. Sure, let's look at a high-scoring response.
When you read transcripts of these top-tier answers, they are absolute triumphs of structure. Look at how systematically a top-tier speaker addresses the prompt.
I think we can look at the exact same transcript and see 2 completely different drivers of success. But go ahead, show me the structural triumph.
They hit the where and who immediately to establish the baseline. One memorable trip I took was to Moree with my family during the summer holidays.
Right, standard opening.
Then they systematically moved to the what. We stayed there for 3 days. Every morning we visited different tourist attractions. In the evenings, we enjoyed local food. It uses a chronological architecture. Morning activities, then evening activities.
Okay, yes, it's organized.
But the real magic is in the discourse markers, the linking words.
You mean words like first, then, finally?
Exactly, but also more complex ones like meanwhile, because, as a result, and for example. These words act as the steering wheel for those GPS waypoints we talked about earlier.
Steering wheel, okay.
From a cognitive linguistic standpoint, these words are brilliant because they force expansion. When you train yourself to end a basic thought and immediately say, for example, you literally force your brain to generate another clause.
That's true. It does prompt you to keep talking.
Right. It stretches the speaking time effortlessly, and it naturally demonstrates the complex sentence structures required for the grammatical range criteria. Plus, saying a phrase like, as a result, takes about 1 to 2 seconds.
Buying time.
Exactly. That is a cognitive buffer. It gives your brain a moment to build the next syntax tree without leaving a dead silence in the room.
I acknowledge the logic there. Linking words absolutely act as cognitive buffers, and they do force the creation of complex sentences. I'll give you that.
Thank you.
But a perfectly structured sentence
is still just an empty shell if it lacks meaning. Structure is just the skeleton. Relying purely on a framework is it's like reading sheet music aloud instead of actually playing the piano.
How so? I mean, the words are there.
Band 7 or higher score in these transcripts is ultimately secured by the high-level vocabulary of experience. Let's look at the lexical choices in typical top-tier answers about travel.
Okay, what words are we looking at?
Words like memorable, breathtaking, scenic, unforgettable, explore, destination. You don't get a band 7 just because you use the word meanwhile correctly to buy yourself 2 seconds of time.
Well, it helps with fluency.
Sure, but you get the high score because you vividly described the mountain views as breathtaking. You get it because you called the journey unforgettable.
But those high-level words are slotted into the structural framework. Without the framework, they are just a jumble of adjectives.
No, I'd say the structure is merely a vehicle to deliver those words. And notice how the best answers always culminate. They usually end with a deep emotional reflection.
Like summarizing the trip?
Something like, this trip was significant because it allowed me to disconnect, enjoy nature, and create wonderful memories. Tapping into those feelings is what naturally generates this advanced vocabulary.
I'm just not sure emotion is reliable enough under pressure.
If you're just focusing on the mechanics of your linking words, you risk a massive pitfall, which is repeating the same basic words. You start saying the mountain was good, the food was good, the weather was good.
That does happen, yes.
Emotion helps you bypass the stress response to access your passive vocabulary, where the richer, more descriptive language lives.
I'm not entirely convinced by that line of reasoning, honestly, because it assumes emotion inherently produces better grammar and vocabulary under pressure.
I think it does.
In a high-stress testing environment, leaning into emotion often produces panic, not poetry. When linguists and examiners analyze why students fail to reach that 2-minute mark, almost all the failures are structural failures.
Give me an example of what you consider a purely structural failure.
The most famous one is stopping after 40 seconds. Why 40 seconds? Because at an average speaking rate of about 130 words per minute, 40 seconds is exactly how long it takes to state the superficial facts of an event if you don't expand on them.
Right, if you just list the facts.
Once the facts run out, candidates freeze. Another failure is ignoring the final prompt on the cue card, the Explain Why section. These are direct results of poor keyword planning and a lack of structural discipline.
But wait.
To get a high score, the unwritten rule is keep talking until the examiner stops you. You cannot do that on pure emotional recall. If your memory naturally concludes at the 1-minute mark, you need a deliberate strategy to keep going.
So what is your solution when a candidate hits that wall?
You need to know how to pivot structurally. You look down at your keyword map, realize you missed a section, and you deploy a structural hinge like, another reason this was so significant was, or to give you an illustration of what I mean.
Ah, I see.
Structure is the safety net that catches you when your memory or your emotional vocabulary inevitably runs dry.
I understand the need for a safety net, but if you look closely at examiner feedback, there is a penalty that is far more dangerous than stumbling over a pause, and that is memorization.
But memorizing a full answer is entirely different than memorizing a structure.
Is it always different in practice, though? When candidates over-prepare these rigid structural frameworks, their prosody, their pitch, tone, and rhythm, flattens out entirely.
They get a bit robotic.
Exactly. They sound like they are reading a script. They say, first, I went to Murray. Then, I ate food. After that, I took photos. It's wooden. It lacks a natural intonation that the pronunciation criteria explicitly demands.
Well, yes, if done poorly.
Exactly. Examiners are highly trained to spot a candidate who is just reciting a memorized formula. So I have to ask you, how can a candidate strictly follow your keyword map and linking word formulas without sounding like a robot?
That is exactly where the mastery of the format comes in. I see why you think formulas sound robotic, but you are confusing the architectural framework with the content itself.
How so?
Think of a jazz musician. Jazz is famous for being spontaneous and emotional, right? But it's actually built on a highly rigid understanding of musical scales and chord progressions.
Okay, interesting analogy.
The keywords on your paper are your chords. The linking words, like As a result, or in my opinion, are your transitions. They are the mechanisms that allow the speaker to build spontaneous, complex sentences on the fly.
So you are saying the language is generated in the moment, but the path is pre-planned.
Exactly. It's controlled spontaneity. If I have the keyword photography in the structural hinge as a result, I can spontaneously generate, I spent hours taking photos of the scenic views, and as a result, I now have a beautiful album.
That flows well.
Right. The framework protects me, but the language is authentically mine.
Controlled spontaneity. That is a brilliant way to phrase it, actually. I will concede that linking words, when deeply internalized, can give the illusion of effortless flow.
They really can.
But I stand firmly by my position that if you are consciously thinking about your hinges while you're speaking, your pacing will be off. The psychology of the candidate dictates the performance.
Sure. Mindset matters.
The key advice is always to stay calm, organize your ideas, and keep speaking naturally. Notice that speaking naturally is the ultimate goal. If a candidate is visualizing the actual mountain they hiked, their voice will naturally rise and fall with excitement.
That's fair.
They will pause naturally, maybe looking up to search for the word breathtaking. Those authentic, thoughtful pauses are vastly different, both visually and audibly, from the panicked, dead silence of someone who forgot their next structural linking word.
But relying on natural pauses is incredibly risky for a language learner. If the pause goes on for 5 seconds, the examiner doesn't know if you are nostalgically remembering a mountain or if you have simply run out of English vocabulary.
That is a risk, yes.
That's why expanding every answer by actively giving reasons and using examples are necessary habits to drill. You shouldn't be searching the ceiling for the word breathtaking in the exam room. You should have activated your descriptive vocabulary beforehand during that 1-minute prep and organized it securely around your structural map.
You know, it seems we are circling the exact same fundamental truth from two completely different directions.
I think we might be.
You're saying that the scaffolding is what allows the language to flourish under pressure. I'm saying that without the genuine intent to share an authentic experience, the scaffolding is just empty metal pipes that echo hollowly.
That is an incredibly fair assessment of our divergence today. To summarize my position, I maintain that Mastering IELTS Speaking Part 2 requires treating that 1-minute preparation time as a strict structural exercise.
Right.
By relying on targeted keywords and mastering logical linking words, you buy your brain the cognitive processing time it needs. You systematically force yourself to expand your answer, provide examples, and safely reach that 2-minute mark without crashing at 40 seconds. Structure is the ultimate shield against the pressure of the clock.
And I maintain that while you absolutely must organize your thoughts, a band 7 or 8 score relies heavily on authentic communication.
Of course.
Focusing on natural English, reliving the sensory feelings associated with the prompt, and engaging with the narrative journey is what gives your speech life. It provides the natural intonation and naturally triggers the advanced associative vocabulary.
Words like scenic and unforgettable.
Exactly. These emerge naturally when you are genuinely trying to convey a memory to another human being, not when you're just trying to fulfill a mathematical formula.
Well, it seems we've found a strong point of convergence, however. Both of these approaches, whether you lean heavily on the discipline of structural engineering or prioritize authentic narrative expression, require intense, repetitive application to become second nature.
Absolutely. Practice is the only way to merge the structure with the natural flow so that it becomes that controlled spontaneity you mentioned.
Right.
And I think we can unite to offer our listeners a practical way to test this out right now. Let's use a classic practice cue card that requires both structure and emotion. Describe a teacher who inspired you.
Oh, that is an excellent high-yield prompt. The standard bullet points for this would be, let's see, who the teacher was, what subject they taught, what made their teaching style special, and an explanation of why you still remember them today.
So we invite you, the listener, to attempt this challenge today. Try to apply both of our perspectives. Take exactly 1 minute on a stopwatch. Write down your keywords, who they were, the subject, their special trait.
but don't write full sentences.
Right, but during that same minute, as you write those keywords, intentionally tap into the authentic sensory memory of sitting in their classroom. What did their voice sound like?
Get that emotional connection.
At the same time, plan your structural hinges. Maybe write down, for example, to illustrate their teaching style, or, as a result, to explain their impact on your life.
And then start a timer for exactly 2 minutes. Speak out loud into the room. Try to balance that structural discipline with authentic expression. Use emotional vocabulary to describe why they inspired you, but let the structure ensure you don't run out of breath at 40 seconds.
Keep talking until that 2-minute timer stops you. Balancing the architecture of your answer with the soul of your experience is ultimately what yields the highest level of communication.
It really is.
It's what examiners are truly looking for, and frankly, it's what makes for compelling communication in real life too.
There is definitely a lot more we could explore regarding the nuances of lexical retrieval and pacing, but finding that equilibrium between the brain and the heart is the true secret to the Band 7+.
We will leave you to form your own conclusion on which approach you find more critical to your own preparation. But the next time you sit down, look at a cue card and watch that 1 minute evaporate in a flash. Ask yourself, are you building a blueprint or are you preparing to tell a story?
Or perhaps you are building a blueprint precisely so you can tell a much better story.
Well said. Thank you for joining us. Keep practicing, keep speaking, and tune in for our next IELTS discussion right here on The Debate.